Raheem Kassam, who's London editor-in-chief of Breitbart News in London. Breitbart is, of course, headed up by Steve Bannon. He joins me now live from Washington. Thanks very much indeed for talking to us here this evening. First of all, I want to get your take on these comments attributed to Steve Bannon, apparently in this book. For example, the first one that we mentioned just there, the suggestion that he described Donald Trump Jr.'s meeting with a group of Russians as treasonous. Do you think that is what he believes?
He gave a long-form interview to 60 Minutes right after he left the White House, and he multiple times called the idea of any collusion with Russia a nonsense, and spelled out why he believed that to be the case. So I take it with a pretty significant grain of salt. I also bear in mind the author of the book's history in having unfortunately been found to have made up quotes before. He actually says, the author says at the beginning of the book, that some of the quotes, some of the stories he tells are interpretations and aggregations of stories and events rather than verbatim quotes. Now, I say that offering a sort of balance to the story. I haven't read the book yet, but I think once the book comes out and once we get a chance to actually get into the pages rather than a couple of lines of quotes, it might give us some broader context to what was said. I don't think Steve thinks there was any treason in the Trump campaign. I'm not sure he would have participated as a U.S. patriot in a campaign that had any treason. But I think he was probably reflecting on the fact that, you know, these things can get to those situations if the right people aren't present, if lawyers aren't present, if the wrong things are discussed in these meetings. And I think that's what he was intimating from what I can tell.
Well, yes, and Steve Bannon himself, I don't think, has denied the quotations as yet. But as you say, that the book is not out yet. He's also reported to have talked about Donald Trump's goal never being to win the presidency, and the suggestion that he was perhaps horrified that he did win. Again, from what you know of Steve Bannon and his role behind the scenes, does that sound credible to you?
I think what's credible about that story is that the president didn't expect to win the presidency, and I think that's what he's getting at there. He had it drummed into him by the RNC, by the more establishment Republicans around him, especially after the Access Hollywood tapes, Billy Bush weekend, that he didn't have a chance of it. And I think possibly what happened is that Donald Trump had that ingrained in his mind. There was one person, and it's well documented in several books that have come out since the election, there was one person in the room at all times who said that he had a 100% metaphysical certitude of winning the election, was Steve Bannon, and that's a pretty well documented fact. So you know, and I'll draw back onto actually the last time I spoke to you guys after I visited with President-elect Trump in his penthouse in Trump Tower, where he did seem taken aback by the victory. He did seem like you know, he didn't expect to win that night. And I don't think it's just President Trump's reaction that you have to look at there. I think you can look at how the stages were set between the Javits Center, Hillary Clinton's huge victory party that she planned to have, with the balloons falling from the glass ceiling above it, and President Trump's, or candidate Trump at the time, his rather small get-together that he was having that night in Midtown Manhattan that I went to as well. And that was a much more sort of, it was almost had a somber vibe at the beginning of the night. So I think there were all sorts of implications that might suggest that at least people had told President Trump he wasn't going to win, and he may have ended up believing them.
And Donald Trump is clearly furious that these things are being said, and he's been very angry towards Steve Bannon. He said, has he not only lost his job, he lost his mind when he fired him. I mean, relations could not be worse, presumably, between these two men.
Yeah, I think these are sort of swings and roundabouts of politics, and especially figures who have been in big business environments as well. Falling outs happen in the boardroom and in the Oval Office all the time. I think it's somewhat overplayed, because I think there are people out there who do have an agenda to drive a wedge between these two people. I think it suits certain constituencies. We know, for instance, that Mitch McConnell, the Speaker, is not exactly the Majority Leader is not exactly a fan of Steve Bannon, and he has the president's ear. So there are people out there who want this wedge to be driven more significantly between the two. But Sarah Huckabee Sanders said herself in the White House press briefing just moments ago that most of the book is false and farcical. Well, if she believes that to be true, then surely she believes that that could be true of Steve's comments too. So they're going to have to make up their minds. The White House will have to make up their minds about how much they believe this to be true, how much they believe that these were direct quotes from Steve or interpretations from the author. And I think we'll see where it goes from there. I can certainly tell you from this side of the pond, there isn't the sort of feeling of panic that a lot of the media are suggesting.
It's interesting that you say the White House has got to make up its mind, but I guess supporters have to make up their mind. The base has to make up its mind too, doesn't it? And aren't they being forced really to choose between Steve Bannon and Donald Trump?
I think some people would want them to choose, yeah, but I'm not sure that they do have to choose. We host 6 hours of radio a day at Breitbart News, and Steve was hosting the radio show last night, and the first thing he said about the president was that he's a great man and that he truly believes in the president's agenda. I think again, the idea of driving this wedge is quite opportune for some. But Steve, certainly in his communications with me over the past 48 hours, has reiterated, Breitbart News doesn't hide where it comes from on the political spectrum. We maintain our belief in the MAGA agenda and everything that the president stood for during the campaign. And I don't think, at least from our side of things, there is any animosity.
And I guess I should explain the MAGA agenda, Make America Great Again, is what you're referring to, isn't it? So
yes.
How will Breitbart report on Donald Trump from here on in? Should we expect it to become more critical?
No change at all. I mean, look, we pride ourselves at being down the line. I talked about the radio show. I host that radio show sometimes myself, and when there are things that need to be criticized, when President Trump talks about an amnesty for illegal immigrants, when he does a tax reform bill that isn't really a reform bill but is just a minor cut for some corporates, we criticize it, and we criticize it vociferously. The Breitbart News audience is President Trump's base, and they will be critical when the time is right too. Here's the thing. Here's the way I look at it. On the political left, there isn't much dissent. We saw that in the Democrat Party. Hillary Clinton controlled that party. Bernie Sanders didn't get a look in. The right doesn't have that. The right is often finds itself in internecine warfare. We know that from the British Conservative Party as well. They find themselves in these situations relatively often. But I think that shows a strength in depth, and I think it shows a breadth of feeling in these parties, in these movements, that we would be remiss to turn our backs on.
And yet some of the criticism is so extreme, isn't it? I mean, the book's author talks about having talked to a huge number of people who work closely with Donald Trump, and he says he's been left with the indelible impression that all these people believe that he's incapable of functioning in his job. I mean, that is very serious criticism. Do you think there's a shred of truth in that? Do you believe in that?
Well, I look at the last year, all right? I look at what he inherited going into office. A crisis in Afghanistan, a crisis in North Korea, a Middle East that's fundamentally at war at the moment, a Europe that's pulling itself apart between Merkel and Viktor Orban and all of this sort of thing, and America standing there going, what the heck do we do about all of this stuff? Well, look, in the first year you've had new Supreme Court judges, you've had new circuit judges, you've had a tax reform bill, which, as I say, not much to my liking, but it is a legislative achievement. You've had the decimation of the Islamic State in Iraq and Syria. I think the first year, actually, people are looking at this and going, you know what, we feared the worst. It's actually been pretty good. And I think Trump's base is reflecting that by holding up support for him. So, if I had one thing to say to this president, just keep on doing what you're doing and don't get bogged down by books, written by Guardian authors. It's not a reliable source as far as I'm concerned.
But is he going to listen to your advice? How closely is he going to listen to the likes of Breitbart again when he's sending legal letters to Steve Bannon? I mean, is Breitbart going to be marginalised now, do you think?
I don't think so. I mean, I think there's an element of pantomime to all of this. I certainly haven't received over the last 48 hours. I've been in contact with all the regular sources that I'm in contact with. I've had messages from people in and around the White House. I've had messages from people who are very close to President Trump just saying this will blow over. It's just a matter of time. We just have to wait it out and wait till it blows over. Look, I'm not going to deny that the President Trump's statement yesterday that came out was pretty scathing, but that's his prerogative. He values loyalty very highly, and when he feels like somebody's been disloyal to him, it's not a matter of business. I'm sure it hurts his feelings, and that's his prerogative to act on that. And I respect that, but I don't think that there's going to be this big divergence. You know, at the end of the day, it's not a belief in him that we have and he doesn't have a belief in us. It's a belief in the philosophy. It's a belief in what policies are coming, and it's a belief in delivering what's best for the American people that unites all of the people involved in this conversation. And whether that's me at a relatively low level or it's Steve at a very high level, I think you'll see this blow over in the next couple of days, and it'll be back to business as usual.
Okay, Raheem, Kassam, thanks very much indeed for your thoughts tonight.
Thank you.